Well, the other two things that make absolutely no sense, Alex, are that if this were truly a health emergency and the focus were to protect U.S. citizens, the first thing you would do is close the border with Mexico. That'd be absolutely the first thing you'd have to do to make sure that it was contained. China has virtually done that. China is restricting flights to Mexico. China is evidently rounding up Mexicans and putting them in quarantine in China, people who have traveled from Mexico. But we're not doing it in the United States. So it's clearly, in the United States, not considered to be something that is of U.S. national security is not the first priority in our response.
You just
We're
stop.
response.
Stop. I mean, start over. You just hit the zeitgeist, Dr. Corsi, and that's the point I've been hammering. But I mean, say it in your own words and break down the different facets from your perspective. Again, I'm going to say this slowly. They said day one over a week ago, they said it's already spread everywhere, so there's no reason to lock down the border, even though the supposed main vector of something threatening the entire future of society was about to come up here. Now, their argument was it's already spread outside the country, so it doesn't matter. But any new cases out of Mexico, if it was so deadly, would continue to cause entirely new spreads of it. So day one, they said it's already spread. Forget it. Border stays wide open. Planes stay in the air from Mexico, the main vector. But we may have to lock down U.S. cities, and they did lock down some houses and homes and hotels and things and airplanes. We may and grabbed reporters and wouldn't test them for it, but held them for a week. So think about this. They fear-mongered and hyped like it was the end of the world, the movie 28 Days Later. But then at the same time, in their actions here in the United States, it was like it was no big deal. So just amazing. Now, I mean, flesh that out.
Well, clearly, if additional people were coming from Mexico with contamination that could be spread to others, which is the key component of how this virus is supposed to spread, person to person, well, then you would want to block the border and keep infected people from coming across. If national security of the United States and health security were the primary objective. It's not, because by keeping the border open accepts the risk that others infected in Mexico will come into the United States, even as illegal immigrants, and spread the disease. So clearly it's a lie that national security or health security of the United States is the number one objective of the U.S. government in responding to the health emergency. We're responding on a continental basis in which we keep the border open. Secondly, I'd like to have an estimate, Alex, of the economic damage done by this hoax. In other words, how many conventions were canceled? How many trips were canceled? What's the damage in terms of not only the vacation industry and the travel industry, but what's the damage overall to international business? Mexico has just about been shut down. Now, I'm anticipating that the very next thing we're going to see is that we need economic aid to Mexico. Suddenly, Mexico is going to become our responsibility to have some kind of repayment to Mexico.
Already happened. Already happened. They're saying $47 billion IMF SDRs, the first money out of the new global currency. Again, for those that don't know, you won't see these SDRs, floating around at McDonald's or at your bank. These are interbank lending, governmental lending. 47 billion SDRs already being drawn on by Mexico, and talk of the United States and Europe paying for those because of the crisis.
Well, there you go. See, this also, the International Monetary Fund with these SDRs, I've been reporting on that extensively. It's also going to be very expensive, but I've been reporting on it because this is the new international currency that China wants to replace the dollar as a standard of foreign exchange reserves. Now, they can be, if the SDRs can be used in Mexico to handle the economic damage done by the swine flu, and that wasn't what China was proposing. But I see here even Bloomberg is reporting, and has been reporting since April 28th, that Mexico will draw $47 billion line of credit from the IMF on these SDRs to handle the swine flu. So there you are. I mean, this is there's an economic agenda here which advances the use of the International Monetary Fund as being a alternative to the World Bank for creating a new world currency. So there's a lot of agendas here. What's clear is if you look at just the number of illnesses and fatalities, they are so minimal that the cost should be going back on the Obama administration for having scared everyone. And the fact that that's not happening just shows how convincingly this agenda of fear can be put forward even when there's no reaction, there's no disease. There's just like a less than a normal flu. It's inconsequential.
So from the globalist perspective, Dr. Corsi, we have passed the test. The fear-mongering from something that killed thousands of times less what a regular run-of-the-mill flu does. Literally, we're talking conservatively 250,000 people die a year, according to the World Health Organization globally, sometimes as much as 500,000. If you go back to the old pandemics, 40 million in 1 year with the swine flu. But in a normal year, 250,000 people die from the regular flu. This thing has killed literally 1/1000th of a regular year, probably. And meanwhile, they acted like it was the end of the world. We got to have global government, forced inoculations, lock down U.S. cities. But the borders stay wide open. None of this makes any sense. So I guess we've passed the test, according to the globalist. We are ready to really give up all of our liberty. If we'll give up all of our liberty for a fake flu, imagine if somebody in government inside the New World Order releases something real, Dr. Corsi.
Well, the next time this happens, it's going to have to be, public is just not going to react immediately to these kind of warnings, although these warnings are put out in a way that is very frightening. They're very frightening, and people immediately become, they flash to plague ideas or the 1918 flu and influenza. We have not had a pandemic since 1918. Even the SARS outbreak out of China was minor in terms of the world population or in terms of the number of people who were sick. This is not 1918. People are much more effectively inoculated. They're much more effectively exposed to flus. And I have believed from the beginning and suspected from the beginning that these avian and swine and other flus are largely a scare and a hoax, which has no basis in medical reality. I don't see any basis for it.
Except to sell vaccines and antivirals and to send police.
To get new power grabs that the governments can do on a transnational, international basis, where the World Health Organization is more credible now in the UN because they're somehow or other the authorities. I don't see that the UN is going to protect Americans, not when the border's wide open and it's clear that the disease is... the hypothesis is the disease comes from Mexico and it's transmitted person to person, and yet the border is kept wide open. It makes absolutely no sense at all.
Well, Doc, let's expand on...
There's got to be another explanation, Alex.
Absolutely. Well, Doc, I mean, take the UN. You know how it works. For those that don't know how it works, the UN has this General Assembly that really doesn't have the power, and then you have the G8 within it that really do have the power, but then different subunits of the UN structure, like the World Health Organization, is quasi-private, and if you go research it, most of its funding is Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation. They're eugenicists, they're globalists, they're population reductionist, climate change, pushers of this new religion, and they brag it's a new religion. They say the public needs one. So when you look at the WHO now being the central commander, this is really the private foundations and the NGOs, private corporations, using the UN as their mechanism.
Well, there's no doubt that the UN is right at the center of this, and it's a power grab on behalf of the UN. The UN is probably the last organization in the world I'd want to be involved if there really were a worldwide health epidemic, because the UN would not necessarily make any decisions that would be in favor of protecting health of Americans. The perspective of the UN is worldwide, and it has its own agenda, which is to grab power.
Absolutely.
I don't see that the UN has ever made decisions within these various organizations where the primary interest is U.S. national security or U.S. economic or health security.
All right, Doc, stay there. Final segment with Dr. Jerome Corsi, writes for WorldNetDaily.com. I'm Alex Jones with Infowars.com.
Have you ever thought about what's in your shampoo?